Hey there, this is Will at Genelec Inc. We're going to talk real briefly about the 9320A, part of the Genelec UNIO technology umbrella. Genelec's UNIO concept and its central device, the 9320A, provide a tailor-made solution for effectively bridging the two worlds of monitoring between headphones and loudspeakers so they can be utilized together to achieve exceptional results from stereo to immersive. It is foremost a SAM monitor controller. It has buttons to control the typical needs of any SAM system. It is configured and updated via the Genelec application. Internal settings made on the 9320 can be done on a group preset by group preset basis, just like loudspeaker group presets. But to avoid confusion, please don't think of the 9320A as an audio interface. Yes, it has additional inputs and outputs, but any audio that goes into the 9320A cannot be returned to your computer on the USB-C cable. For an in-depth tutorial, stay tuned for the Getting to Know the 9320 SAM Reference Controller webinar hosted by Marcel Schechter on August 22nd at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on the Genelec official YouTube channel.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our first webinar about UNIO, today focusing on the 9320A SAM reference controller. So first of all, the 9320 is not called UNIO. I think this was a mistake from us, because when we introduced it, we spoke also about UNIO for the first time, so this was mixed up a little. But UNIO is an ecosystem, and hopefully I'm able to explain this complete idea to you today. As always, please feel free to ask all of your questions. Just, enter your comments on the platforms you are using, and we'll read them instantly and we'll reply to you hopefully within a few minutes. So, just make use of this. So we try to sum it up with this sentence, which says, bridging the gap between calibrated in-room loudspeaker monitoring and personal headphone monitoring. All of you that ever mixed or mastered or just, enjoyed music on headphones and on loudspeakers know that there is a fundamental difference. Just the way we perceive sound is different. So if we are listening to loudspeakers, of course, there's usually a crossfeed from the left to the right and vice versa. So we are, of course, getting sound from the left speaker also on our right ear. And as said, vice versa. If we are listening to headphones, there's a complete separation. And there's also a huge difference with the so-called externalization. So where do we somehow localize sound? And with headphones, of course, most of the time we localize it inside our head, because this is somehow how it happens, because the loudspeakers of the headphones are directly on our ears, and there is no externalization. And with loudspeakers, this is completely different, especially if you think about surround and if you think about immersive, where you really have specific locations of the loudspeakers. And of course, there are at a different point in the room, and there is a difference in distance and also, of course, in time of flight between the different speakers. So this is somehow a challenge. If you start mixing on loudspeakers and then you would like to continue on headphones, that's not that easy. And the same happens if you just start mixing on headphones and later on check the mix on loudspeakers. And this is what we want to bridge the gap. So this gap between the perceived sound through loudspeakers and headphones. And of course, what we would like to achieve is that you can work with confidence so that you can really rely on what you're doing almost anywhere. So not only in the studio, but also, for example, in this nice Nordic kitchen where you could sit with your headphones. And we try to show this in our hero video, so the video we made to introduce UNIO, that we had this nice virtual loudspeakers, you can see here in green, that somehow are at the same position compared to the setting in the studio, although you are listening through headphones. So how is this possible and how do we achieve this? First of all, the basis, of course, is loudspeaker monitoring. And we still think that this is the most reliable way of working. And this is not only because we are a loudspeaker manufacturer, most people will agree on that this is still, you know, the best basis to create a mix and to make your decisions. And because the room has a huge influence, all of you already know, we have our Genelec Loudspeaker Manager, now in version 5, which makes it possible to adapt the speakers to your room acoustics. So also to make sure that the acoustics don't, you know, change the overall sound you get. And GLM allows it to have different setups. So starting from stereo, you could of course also work in mono if you like to, up to huge immersive setups like 714, 916, and even larger setups. And all of these setups will always make sure that every speaker gets a frequency response correction. So we will use filters to adapt to the room. So we measure the status quo of the speaker at his position, or at, no, I'm talking about a person, at its position. And this is the red curve you see here. And then we have the blue curve, the compensating filters. And the resulting one is green. And as you might know, or if you have seen already our webinars about GLM, the algorithm taking care of this calibration is quite intelligent. So we make sure that we only do things that make sense, you know, from the perspective of physics. So for example, if there's a narrow, deep notch in the bass range, you cannot compensate for that with a filter. It's not possible. You will have to find a better positioning and do acoustical treatment. And therefore we then can help you with the grade report. This is also one of the webinars. And if we now want to get similar results, or at least, for example, externalization and a reliable imaging, we can use our so-called Aural ID technology. And Aural ID starts with generating a so-called HRTF. I won't go into details here because there will be a separate webinar about only Aural ID. But to make this understandable in an easy way, everyone, of course, of us is hearing directions and can externalize sounds because the sound somehow is changed. For example, if it's coming from the front on axis, or if it's coming from the side, or if it's coming from behind, and of course also top, bottom, just because the shape of our upper torso and of course our ears. So these are the factors that influence the sound. And if you would like to make this possible to be reproduced with productions, somehow you should know how your head and your ears and your upper torso looks like. And then you can generate something that helps you to somehow simulate directions. And we use a principle that we shoot photos of your ears. You might know this from other HRTF tools as well. Usually photos are just used then to find the best match. So they have a few models and then they just select, okay, this is, for example, larger ear and has this shape. So let's go for model number 5. We do it a little different because for us, it's really important that we give you your personal HRTF. So this is really made for you only. And therefore, we not only make these photos from the ears, they are mainly used to have a scale because you will be asked to have a ruler, you know, directly besides your ears. And the most important thing is a video. So as you can see here with Darren and Purang, you should have a second person, and this person will walk around you and will approach you and will also, for example, especially in the range of your ear, change the angles so that you can get a really detailed 3D model, which looks like this then. It's a little scary with this with this red and black thing. This is, for example, Ville, also one of my colleagues. And as I know him, I know that this looks absolutely realistic. Yeah? So Ville does not have that much hair. And on the right side, you can see that the area of the ears is even more detailed. So we have a huge level of details there because this is the main thing. And then we create this HRTF for you, and you can use this, for example, as a SOFA file. SOFA file is a standard file that is used by a lot of, HRTF renderers and third-party software. And you can, of course, also load the HRTF in our own Aural ID software, which will be released soon as version 2. And this software is very flexible because you can make use of, the huge amount of directions we can simulate. It's more than 800. And you can load a virtual speaker setup and then you can fine tune it. So for example, you can listen to your 714 on loudspeakers and then compare it to what you hear on headphones. And for example, if surround left is not on the same position for you from, the way you perceive it, you can just click on the speaker and then just change the angle slightly. Or, can just change also, if you like, to the level slightly. So this is really flexible. And and you can just figure out that you can find an option that you really get a very similar impression between studio with loudspeakers and your headphones. And this, of course, then can help you later on. For example, if you have started a mix and then you're on the road, you're in a hotel room, and someone just wants to, get a revision of this mix, then you can do this on headphones, and you can get a really similar experience. Yeah, and now let's focus on today's main topic, which is our SAM reference controller, the 9320A, which somehow also is somehow the heart of everything because it allows you, of course, to control GLM, to listen to loudspeakers, to listen to headphones because it has a really, reference grade headphones output, and a very, very versatile device. And because it's that versatile, it's a little complex, and sometimes, this can make things a little complicated. And hopefully, I can guide you through this to help you understand what are the options and what you can do with it. Yeah, first of all, if you buy a 9320A, it will also contain our measurement microphone. Those of you who already know our GLM kits know these microphones, and it's of course exactly the same here. But this, first of all, shows you that, of course, the 9320A can be used to calibrate the system. So if you have this device, you don't need the GLM kit. So this is not needed because this device will connect to the GLM network, and of course it can make use of the measurement microphone. I would start with some basic facts, and then of course we will go into the details. So first of all, the 9320A is of course a so-called tactile controller. So you can just press buttons instead of using the mouse in the software. You can easily adjust the volume instead of, for example, just moving the fader with the mouse. So this is the first thing you can do with it. It has monitor controller functions, and this is a mixture between monitoring controller functions of GLM, like mute, dim, and things like that, preset level recall, but also standalone monitoring controller functions like mono, diff, and invert, which usually only can be found on traditional monitor controllers. I will talk about this later on. The device is also a USB audio output device. This is very important. Sometimes if we talk about an interface, this is not wrong, of course, but interface usually, of course, for all of you means that you can also have inputs. So you can record into your DAW with this device, and this is not possible. Very important. So you can connect sources to this device, like, for example, you can have an analog source and you would like to listen to it through your speakers using AS-EBU. So then you can do this because you can convert signals in both directions. But there are no inputs that are visible in the DAW. So you won't see the analog inputs and you won't see the AS-EBU. So this is not what it was designed for. It's just for output. Already explained. It's a digital analog input converter, so you can just convert signals in both directions. It has a reference grade headphones output with EQ, which is just useful, for example, to change the overall tonality, similar to what we do with our sound character profiler in GLM. And I think what's really important to point out, just check, the values, so the technical data of this headphones output, because this is really absolutely top notch. So even, studio headphones that usually need a lot of power and therefore can be challenging for some interfaces can easily be run with this device. So we made sure that we just have enough power to also to drive the bigger and more complex studio headphones. You can do a really flexible alignment of the outputs and inputs, which helps you, for example, that you have the volume knob at one position, and if you switch, you don't have any jumps in volume. So you can just make sure that analog and digital, for example, together with headphones just match. So this is also the reason why we don't have, for example, a separate controller for the headphones level, which usually can be found in a lot of interfaces, or that you have to switch to get to the headphones level. So if you just spend some time, usually it's already aligned very good from the start, but you can easily adjust this then to your needs. And of course, also the inputs can be trimmed. This is also sometimes useful. Yeah, then of course you can use the speaker calibration. As already mentioned, we need for GLM. And you can use calibrated listening levels, especially if you have digital signals and then you are working in a broadcast environment and you need, for example, loudness standards like R128. And I think a very interesting feature that you usually don't find in these devices, but I think it makes absolute sense because it's just made to protect your, hearing, which is a very, very, I think, important part of what we do. We have a so-called noise dose estimation, which just can detect how loud do you listen to something over which time. And this is then just, showed to you. And I think all of you in a professional environment can make use of this, but also everyone who's just interested in how loud am I listening, and is this already in a critical, range, or can I just say, yeah, that's fine, I'm safe here. So this is very important. So fantastic. Then let's start with looking at the device itself. We start with the backside, and you will see it's relatively clear. Everything is also, everything is written there. But still you will see you can do a lot of things with these inputs, outputs, and nice connectors. Use case one is very simple. So we just have a DAW, for example, and we connect the 9320 and use it as a stereo output device. This is how we show it here at USB audio. And then you can, of course, use all outputs of the 9320. So the headphones output, the analog output, and the digital output, for example, to connect two pairs of speakers. And and very important, so you can use the 9320 standalone, so the device only without GLM software and any further additions. But what's important, I just listed it here, the functions are then reduced. So you can use all headphones functions, that's clear. You can of course use the audio input and output. This is also then routable just with the device, so you don't need the software. You have the basic volume control functions, including mute, dim, preset, mono, diff, and invert. This is what I will talk about later. You can of course use the sound exposure, and you can monitor the SPL. But what's not possible, and this is somehow a compromise, but this had to be done, so you cannot switch different group settings, for example. So if you have different groups and want to switch them, you will need GLM. This is not possible with the device itself. Therefore, we always recommend to have GLM because it's free, so it does not make any sense to not use it. And GLM is also needed to configure the device, so otherwise you will have some issues. And this would be the classical setup now, that you have GLM, you have your DAW, you use, for example, stereo out. And then, of course, you can decide if you have, let's say, SAM speakers, which of course makes sense, then you can calibrate them, and these could be connected to the digital output. And then, let's say you have an analog pair as well, you could connect this to the analog outputs. You can, of course, also use two pairs of SAM monitors. and have them both connected, then one pair to analog, one pair to output. And then, of course, you can use the headphones in addition. Then, as already mentioned, you could use Aural ID to get some externalization and to use an HRTF. This would still just work like this, that you configure everything and set it up on your computer, so that Aural ID standalone app will be available with version 2, is just at the end, for example, of your chain. So you can just route the DAW outputs, or also, for example, Apple Music and things like that, into Aural ID. And then you can output the stereo to the 9320. And then it's possible, for example, even to listen to 714 in a binauralized way, which is only stereo, with the 9320. If you want to use real multi-channel playback with, like I would say, for example, surround or immersive setups, then you would, of course, need an external interface because, as said, the 9320 can only do stereo. And at this moment, the 9320, of course, still is very useful because you can switch groups, you can control GLM, you can make all of your basic adjustments, but the audio is run through the interface, so through an external device. And it's also important, I did not mention that before, that the 9320, of course, is not capable of doing audio over IP. So although we have the network ports, you will see these are used for our GLM network, but it's not an AES67 device, for example. So if you want to use multi-channel, then you will have to use an external device. If this external device provides AES67, then you know we have the 9401, which allows it to connect all of our SAM monitors to AES67 as well, because this device is a bridge between AES67 and traditional AES-EBU. Yeah, back to the back side of this nice device. So as already said, we have these two RG45 connectors. The lower one is for the GLM network, the other one is just the terminator. So if you have really, really long cable runs, you can just use a terminator there. But only GLM network, no audio over IP. So just connect this, and then it's similar to what we already did with our, Genelec network adapter. So the GLM kit, you just run a daisy chain. So you go from the 9320 to the first device input, and then not input, output. Here it's just RG45 1 or 2, and it's of course absolutely up to you which one you use. The order does not matter at all, but you just connect all your devices as a daisy chain with RG45 cables. Yeah, then we have the analog outputs, and they are symmetrical with TRS. So you would need TRS to XLR male cables to connect it to our speakers. Of course, this was a decision because, the device should not be too huge. And if we would have used XLR for everything, then yeah, it's easily a little bigger then. So this is just the cable that you know it. So just make sure that it's a TRS cable, so also made for symmetrical connection. And then this goes to XLR male. They can be found at various dealers. It's no problem. And of course you connect each speaker to one output. Then we have the digital output, which is just a great addition, I think, because a lot of you always asked us, what should I use just for AES-EBU straightforward? And yeah, here you go. This is AES-EBU straightforward. So technically the best connection to SAM speakers because they operate in the digital domain already, and so there are no conversions anymore. So it's just a digital signal going into the speaker, is processed digitally, and then in the end, of course, you get some analog output because we still don't have AES-EBU connectors in our ears. And cables you should use, of course, is cables that are specified for digital audio, which just means it's 110 ohm. So just make sure that you get these. Analog standard cables, XLR cables might work if the cable runs are shorter, but especially if you have also a chain, and this usually happens because you connect from speaker to speaker or then to subwoofers, just get these cables. They are also inexpensive. And please also, this is also something I have to mention, standard regular studio cables are perfectly fine. You don't have to go for any fancy stuff. This does not make any difference. So, and as said, because now we have 2 channels on one cable, so it's left and right on this digital output. So we go to the first speaker and then to the second. And in GLM, when you configure your setup, of course, you place a speaker on the left side, if it's the left one, and right. Then GLM automatically sets the flag A and B. You can also change this later on. So A is always left channel, B is the right channel. If you want to use the analog inputs, for example, you have an analog mastering chain and also would like to listen to that using the digital outputs, you can do this just by using the analog inputs. And then you need TRS, and this time it's XLR female. And just connect it also completely symmetrical. And of course, you can use exactly the same cables that are used for outputs, for input signals. It's also the XLR to XLR 110 ohms for digital signals. So if you want to input an AS-EBU signal to the unit. I already mentioned the microphone. It's exactly like we do it with our GLM network adapter. There's a serial written on it, and this serial is used to load the correct calibration file we created for you in the factory. And this is just connected to, you might have guessed it, this wonderful small input with the microphone symbol. This time it's easier on the traditional GLM kit network adapter. There was a second one of these inputs, which is used for the volume for the wired volume controller, and this sometimes causes confusion. So you could mix this up. Now it's no longer possible. There's only one of these connectors for the microphone. Yeah, and then of course the USB-C section on the right side, where you can just connect your device to your computer. And usually all of the devices are capable of providing enough power that the device is just working perfectly fine. Only if you see some issues there, you could use an additional power supply, and this could be connected to the second USB-C port, which is here, just called power, PWR. So this is the port we will use to connect it to the computer. Yeah, and this is straightforward. And as said, only needed if your computer is a little out of breath. I don't know. If you then start GLM and start a new setup, so just file new, for example, you will find this device in the pool. This is also something that changed with GLM 5. So in the past, usually the adapter from the GLM kit was not in the pool, so you did not drag it to the right side. But now for both of these devices, you can find them in the unplaced cell. So this is here on the left side. And if you did this, usually you should place it in the middle of the grid. You might see something like this. This is why I added this. So there would be an update available. And at the moment, unfortunately, you cannot update it straight away here. We're trying our best to make this possible soon. At the moment, it's just the case that you should just, confirm group and then confirm, usually it starts with confirm setup, then confirm group, and then you can skip autocal, skip autophase, and then you are in the main window of GLM. And the moment you are there, you can then click on the device and you will see this window. And then you can just select update. And then the firmware will be updated. And always make sure that the firmware is up to date. This is very important. So usually we only do firmware updates if it makes sense. So just make sure to do this. And then, for example, you could go back with group preset and then you start calibrate, and then you can start the regular calibration. But as I said, we hopefully can do this a little more easier in the future. Because sometimes you really think, why do I have to click now on confirm, 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 although I did not do anything. So yeah, now let's look. Backside was nice of the device, but I think top section, of course, is also of interest. Very important, I think most of you always ask for that. When it's about a controller, it's usually about controlling volume in a tactile way, so that you can just, grab a volume knob, turn it, and that's it. And we made sure that this knob really, I think, feels very, very good. So it has really, quality feeling if you touch it, and it also feels a little heavy. And yeah, I think it's just fun to use it. So, and of course, this directly is connected to the sensitivity or to the volume fader in GLM. Those of you using GLM, of course, know these nice functions as well. So, of course, you can mute your complete setup. You can dim everything by 20 dBs. You can recall a preset. This is the preset level. And you can switch on and off the bass management. This button, the preset button, always loads preset volume preset 1. And yes, we have 2 of them, but you can only directly access preset 1. And bass management on-off, of course, is only available if there is a subwoofer included, and then you can somehow switch on and off the subwoofer, and at the same time the speakers will go to full range. And this is the section you see here. And as said, preset on the 9320 will load this preset one. So at the moment it would be -40 that is loaded. And -50 is not accessible from the unit. If you would like to do something like this, you can also use the group sensitivity, for example. You could do a group that is just -40 or a group that is -50. And then you can switch the groups with 9320 and it will just load this. So you will have to go to group preset and then edit. And then you can change the so-called group sensitivity. So this would be a workaround if you would really like to have this. Because as you know, you can use up to 4 groups for direct access here with the 9320. And here you see, here you see them. So GLM itself can use more groups, but the first 4 are always accessible. And you can change the order of groups in GLM just by, command click on the name of the group, and then you can choose move up or down. This was also not possible, for example, in GLM4, and with GLM5 you now can do this because, of course, it's essential. So if I want to make sure I want to use 4 groups for direct access with 9320, then it's a nice feature to just have the option to bring these groups to the top. So yeah, then let's have a look at the output section, which of course offers headphones, analog and digital. And this is also visible in GLM. By the way, you only see this if you use the 9320. So otherwise, if you have the standard GLM kit, then of course this section is not visible in GLM. Otherwise, the software is completely identical. So there are also no separate versions. It's just that the look changes slightly if you have the 9320 connected. And you can always see marked in green the output setting that is used at the moment. So this one would have analog selected at the moment. The moment you switch to the headphones output, the speakers will always be muted. This is just a decision we made because, of course, usually this is how it should be done. So usually it doesn't make any sense to listen to headphones and at the same time to speakers. There might be some things like you want to have a musician sitting next to you who's just, playing a brilliant guitar solo, and he wants himself screamingly loud, and you still want to listen to the speakers. But as said, this is not a recording interface, and the guitar player is not visible on the inputs. So unfortunately, this cannot be done here. This is more like from an engineer's perspective, so someone who's mixing and mastering. And the moment I switch to the headphones, I want to be sure that the speakers are turned off. Yep, and then you see, for example, now headphone would be selected in GLM. Speaking about the headphones output, I think it makes sense to have a look at these nice 3 functions we have available as monitor controller functions. So you can switch to mono, which of course I think is pretty clear. So you will hear a mono sum of left and right, and of course the level is adjusted so that it's the same level and loudness you had before with the stereo signal. And of course you can use this to check the mono compatibility, which still is important from time to time. And of course it can also be used to check the phantom center. So if you would make sure that the phantom center is precisely in the middle, for example, or if there would, some adjustments would be needed, then this is a really nice way of doing it. And as said before, these functions, so mono, diff, and invert, are completely standalone options, so they are not related to GLM. So this is happening with the signal processing in the unit itself. So if you would use something external, an external interface, and would like to use this, it's not possible. So only what gets into the 9320, for example, as USB audio input or analog or AES, can be heard with these options. Then we have diff. I think this is not, that well known, although it's a really nice option, because diff makes sure that you are only listening to the so-called uncorrelated content. So, easily spoken, what is not in the middle. So for example, if it's a pop rock mix, usually you have, the kick drum in the middle, a snare drum in the middle, also bass usually, and side signals would be keyboards, guitars, and of course, especially reverbs and things like that. And if you press this button, everything that is just mono, so that is the same on left and right, will completely disappear. So for example, if you would listen to a just spoken word recording and you press diff, then it should be gone because this is a mono recording. And this really helps you to spot issues sometimes in recordings and in mixes. And you can also compare it with, I think some of you might be familiar with MS recording, where you have a mid signal and a side signal. And this diff button shows you the side signal only. So sometimes it's really interesting to also listen to productions you want to analyze and find out, for example, what's happening with the reverb. And this is way easier to understand if you just have something like this diff option that you can listen to. So it's L minus R. And therefore, the difference, this is where the name comes from, is the side signal, which is still audible. And then you can get a good impression. You can also have some fun, for example, listening to an MP3. I think most of us agree, usually they sound pretty well, especially at higher rates like 256 or 320. But just, out of fun, press the diff button and then you will realize what's happening on the side signals. This is, of course, the algorithm works like this. They know that this is masked usually by the mid signal, but then you can clearly hear, artifacts and, these birding things like, and this is also only possible if you just use this nice button. And then finally we have invert, and invert is a stereo signal now and gives you the left channel on the left side, and then on the right side, still the right channel, but inverted, so completely out of phase somehow. And this is relatively strange if you listen to it for the first time, because things that had been somewhere in the middle just go somewhere, and I really mean somewhere. But content that is uncorrelated is then more audible in the center of the stage. And this also can be used, for example, to analyze recordings and also to just make sure, for example, if stereo microphones are positioned correctly, or if the complete recording setup works as intended. So this is what you can do with these nice functions. And now let's go back to the input section, which of course can be used with the unit alone. I just, made this short video here where you can see if I press it, you can just select the different options. It's always a checkbox that gets a check. And this is how you do it. So really straightforward and pretty easy. And you can also access this in GLM if you just click on the icon of the 9320 again. And then you will see this nice window, which is now a little larger. And in the top right corner, you can then just click on this small arrow besides USB, and you can select analog, digital, or USB. So this is also possible there. You also see that this window gives you a lot more information. First of all, this is also really good to trouble check sometimes things. For example, is there an input signal? I don't hear anything, but is there an input signal coming in? Then you can see this here with input level. You have output level. You have the sound exposure, later on, how long did you listen at higher volume? And then you have microphone level, which is shown as RMS, and peak. So these are the two options you see here. And and CPU usage is usually not not an issue at all. So this is the main window. And the most important button here is on the lower right corner, which just says settings. And if you press on settings, then you can start configuring the device exactly to your needs. We start with the common tab, and measurement microphone already explained. This just shows you if it's connected, yes, no, and then the serial. And of course, make sure that the serial just matches what's printed on the microphone. Usually you don't have to check this if you just use the microphone that came with the 9320. So these are matched automatically. It's only that, let's say you have another microphone or an older microphone, and then change the serial and press on load cal, so load calibration, and then the correct calibration is used. Under sound exposure, we have, I think, really interesting features because first of all, let's have a look at current SPL here. We have SPL weighting now available, and a lot of you had always been a little confused that the reading of the GLM microphone was different compared to the reading of a real SPL meter or even, I don't know, a smartphone application. And this is because we never used a weighting. So this was always set, which means there is no weighting. And now you can just, switch between these. And I can just show you in a second, how they what the difference is between A, C, and Z. In this front line, we have the mode for the noise dose. So there are different standards. I can just open this. And for example, H870 is, I think, an ITU standard, which we would recommend to use. Other standards are OSHA. This is from the US, I think. And usually they just define, what is safe listening. So what SPL level over what time becomes critical. And sometimes, of course, these are studies, so they just try to do their best. But of course, there are different findings. So for example, I think the Americans think that you can listen a little louder for a little longer compared to what the ITU is recommending. Yeah, so this is why we have H870 as the first standard. And I show you the values. Just for your understanding, because we sometimes get confused here, we have absolute sound pressure level, which can be measured. And then we have, of course, what we somehow perceive. So what is the loudness? So how does it feel for us? And this cannot be measured at all. The only thing that is absolutely obvious, that if you make tests, for example, people get different sine tones, and they just should make sure that they sound, for them, that they have the same loudness. So they should just make sure, for example, the 1 kilohertz thing should sound exactly the same loudness level wise as, for example, 50 hertz or 80 hertz. And what happens is that we are way less sensitive in the bass. So you will need very, very, high levels to get the same feeling compared to this mid-range here. So these are the so-called curves of equal loudness. And for example, let's say this is 60. So this would be a so-called 60 phone, which would relate to 60 dB SPL at 1 kilohertz. Yeah, and to get this impression with bass, look at this. This is over 100, just to give you the same impression. And this is what can make things really complicated, because the way, for example, we also hear the tonal balance between mid-range and upper, mids and bass changes also with listening volume. For example, the so-called dB-SPL-A scale, which is used very often, originally was made for lower listening levels. Now we also use it for, traffic noise and things like that. This is already high noise, in my opinion, because it's more than 70 or 80 dBs. And originally, I think it was below 50. And then you have the other scale that is used for, let's say, concerts, for example. So these curves had the idea, for example, if we are not sensitive in the bass range, why should, for example, 100 dB at 80 hertz why should this have this impact? And they thought we want to represent how we perceive it, and therefore we will have to make sure that we reduce it, for example. So the set weighting we used, because a microphone is a technical device. A microphone device does not talk about loudness or phone. A microphone can just tell you, this is what I measured. So this is absolute the right value. And therefore, if you listen, for example, to bass heavy stuff, our GLM microphone always displayed levels that had been, minimum 10 dBs higher than, for example, your smartphone app or the SPL meter, which was set to A weighting. And just because, you see that A weighting means that the bass is just not, weighted that much. It's just reduced. And there's also a huge difference if you then switch to C. And this is usually what is recommended for, higher listening levels. And although sometimes, of course, people still use it. So if there's a concert, they will tell you, A weighting. Just because, for example, they want to prove, it wasn't too loud. Which is, of course, absolutely not true. Because especially, let's say it was an EDM festival, you know where the stuff is happening in the bass range. And if you measure EDM with dB SPL-A, then it's really not, I would say, not a realistic value that you get out of it. So therefore, you should use C. But as said, this is now possible with the 9320. You can select between these three. So you can just decide for yourself what you would like to listen to. And, back to these nice standards, just for example, that you see, this is one of the standards. And this is always, similar what they do. So, for example, they define what is safe. And in this standard, it was around 80 for 40 hours. This would be, the classical thing that you have 5 working days with 8 hours. And then you would, after this week, you could still say, okay, you can do this for years and it would not harm your hearing. If you go higher, for example, and you see this is pretty impressive. So, for example, something like 100 dBs, this is 19 minutes, which is nothing. Yeah. And this is why I sometimes discuss with people also about, movie theaters and concerts and things like that. So I always have, my hearing protection with me, which gives me at least 15, or you could also get 25 dBs. Not for the lowest bass, because of course this is still coming through my body. But think about it. If you just attend a concert, which easily has 100 sometimes, easily, and the concert is 2 hours, this is not cool. I just have to put it like this. And it's, of course, nice that usually, of course, we can just handle it for some years. But it's also pretty obvious that a lot of people in their 40s nowadays just getting problems. And the good thing is, that for younger musicians, it's getting better again, because they use usually the hearing protection, or they use good in-ear monitoring, and then they can bring down everything. If you just played in the 70s in front of a Marshall wall, yeah, I think we had been here. So after 4.5 minutes, weekly doses is done. Problem is that the concert just, was 3 hours. And then the next day there was the next concert. So this is why some of these guys nowadays, usually have some, hearing aid. So just be aware of that. So just protect your hearing and just think about it. Is it really needed to mix on high levels? Usually it's not, because you have the best feeling for balance, usually around 70 to 75 dBs, which is absolutely fine. And then you also don't, get this listening fatigue, and you can reliably work, and you will still, be able to work when you are older than I am now. So this is just, I think, really important. And if you check our manual, then we show in detail, which are the numbers picked by these standards. For example, and the mode 2 of this H87, this is a little, more carefully selected. It's only 75. And as said, for example, the US version is 90. I don't know, how you can select 90. And and then you see, the critical hours. So the US really thinks that you can have 90 at 8 hours. Don't do this. And here is then what they define as, as really safe. So then there is no accumulation anymore. So if you're below that, for example, it stops just, adding your noise dose. That's the thing. Yeah, and here we go. Again, this is, where you can select the weighting for the microphone. And here, the noise dose is displayed. And of course, you can then reset it at any time. What's also cool, I think you know that, of course, if you just listen to loudspeakers, you can use your GLM microphone to somehow just monitor this SPL. And the microphones should, of course, then be relatively close to where you are. Otherwise, it can just, give you wrong values. For some people, for example, just hang it from above, and then it's very similar. And we can also offer this to you for the headphones, because if we know the sensitivity of the headphone, we can calculate that. We have the input, because the 9320 knows the input level. You just saw it, with this nice metering. And we know the output and we know the sensitivity, and then we can calculate, okay, this is a value of, let's say, 80 dBA. So just check, the manual of your headphones, or just, ask the manufacturer. Usually all of them can just tell you the sensitivity. Enter it here, and then you can also rely on that using headphones. And this is really cool, because usually this is a black box. If you are just listening to headphones, usually you don't know. Of course, for example, nice devices by Apple always tell me, you had been listening, it's way too loud. Although I just connected it, for example, to my car. So it's a really old-fashioned car, and I use a mini jack output, and then of course I have to bring it up. But still my phone thinks that I'm listening at full level all the time. This is, so don't rely on these things. This is, I think, it's a better option. Yeah, and what you also can do is this user interface, the screensaver time. So you can go up to 600 seconds, which just means that the display, is turned on and off, just to also have longer lifetime for the display. And usually it's also a little annoying if the studio, is not that bright. Then it makes sense that it's just off. Therefore, for the same reason, you can also change the LED brightness. And if you like to, you can also decide that the LEDs should go off with the screen as well, so that it's completely then dark. And of course, the moment you touch something, it will come to life again. You have an EQ for the headphone section, which of course only affects the headphones output. And as you see at the moment, it's pretty basic and similar to what we offer with the sound character profiler. So it's not, to do complex EQ settings, because usually we hope that a good, studio headphone already has a response that is absolutely acceptable and which works fine. But of course, we can discuss this in the future, yeah, because some of you already asked for that, if it would make sense to have a more complex EQ here. At the moment, this is what you can do. So you have two standard filters where you can just adjust the frequency, the Q, and the gain. And then we have slope, which just makes it possible, to change the tonality. And of course, sometimes also useful, especially if you had been to concerts too often or had the guitar amp standing on one side, you can change the balance, between left and right. So, and I'm not kidding here. Sometimes this can really be useful. For example, just if you have a flu or something. Yeah, I know of people, and I sometimes have it myself. Then it's really off. And then this is pretty helpful. Okay, and then we have the I/O section. This is still the settings window. So there's a lot of stuff in it. And this is what I spoke about in the beginning. There you can adjust the level trims. So for the input section, analog, digital, USB, and for the output section, same here. And just use this, to just make sure that if you have adjusted a volume setting, it should, of course, give you similar loudness on the different outputs. That's the thing. And here in the end, we have something very important that is sometimes causing a lot of confusion. This is why, hopefully I can now just point this out to you, how to use this. This section shows you how you control the volume with this device. And there are two options. Option one is GLM fixed. And GLM fixed means the unit sends out full level. Yeah, so it's not attenuated completely. This is complete full level. And you are changing the volume with GLM. So comparable, for example, you just had a digital device sending out IS-EBU with full level, and then you change the volume with GLM, with your GLM controller. With the volume controller and the GLM kit. This is what GLM fixed means. And the adjustable option means that the 9320 itself changes the volume. So it's then just reduced and scaled. So you get lower voltage output, technically spoken, if adjustable is selected. If you are using SAM speakers, of course, usually I would go for, or you have to go for GLM fixed, because this is the only thing that makes sense, because you want to have the signal at the full resolution, which means full level at the input of the speaker. Then it, it's just processed by the DSPs with highest resolution, and in the end, it's just then reduced again. So this is what you should select if you use SAM speakers. But if you use analog speakers as well, for example, 8020s, you still have them, you love them, which is great. Connect them and then just make sure that you have the analog output set to adjustable. Otherwise, loud. This is the only thing you really should be aware of. If you select GLM fixed and you connect a speaker that is not a SAM speaker, it can become a little louder. And then you could be happy if it's an 8020, because then it's still acceptable. But let's say you connect a 1234, then yeah, some contact with the other people living in your block, I would say. So GLM fixed should be used for all SAM speakers. Its volume is controlled with the GLM network. So of course the speakers also have to be connected to the GLM network with the RG45 cables. And if it's an analog model or if it's a non-SAM model, then use adjustable. And if you would like to change this, you can always do this. And this is, I think, very useful to do this for every group, because sometimes you might have a different group settings. You will have to go to group preset and then edit. And if you then click on this device, then you see this option. And you can not only select the master level control here, you can also define for the group input and output preset. And this is very, very useful because this means you can switch a group and it will always, for example, select digital outputs, or you can switch to a group that always has the analog outputs. You could make a group for example, your SAM speakers and a group for the 8020s, and they always would use the analog output. And then you don't have to switch anymore. You just select the group and everything is just set up correctly. You don't have to go to the output button and things like that. Yeah, and as said, just do this for every group. So go to Group Preset Edit, click on the 9320, and then change input, output to your needs, and make sure that the master level control is set correctly as well. And we'll just end with showing you what you can also still display on the unit itself only if you press the menu button. This looks somehow like this. You can just, select a category and then just somehow enter the menu then. And most of the basic functions are available here as well. So you can also check this. But as said, for example, all of these things like master level control, which are really essential, only can be done with GLM. So I would highly recommend to use GLM together with this device. And because it just ends at -60 at the moment, this is a default setting we introduced with GLM5, that we have a startup level. And this is very low with -60. But, with digital inputs at full level, sometimes you work with -40 and -35 and things like that. This is why we selected -60. You can easily, of course, change this. You can just go to, the GLM menu and then just change the startup level. But I would always define it. It really makes sense. And just, always pay attention to digital signals at full level. So make sure you have this safety layer so that also, as said, you can also use group sensitivity. If you have a digital group, you can use group sensitivity, set it to -30, and then you already have some safety. That is very useful. And of course, you can also use the maximum level restriction, that the device just cannot go higher. And this is also possible if you store the settings to the speakers. Then you also have the startup level and you also have the maximum level restriction. Yeah, and somehow this is the end of this first part. And as said, there will be more. We have this nice graphic, and hopefully you now can already see what UNIO is all about. So as said, it's not a device, it's an ecosystem. So it's just an idea how we can make it even easier for you to work with reliable results on headphones, on speakers, and not only in the studio, but also in other environments as well. And this is what I think this graphic displays in a nice way, with the 9320 at the center of everything. And this is why we started with it today. If you have any questions, as always, please just reach out to us and contact us under support@genelec.com. And we are almost always available and we are always fast. This is what I can say. We are really fast. So we have a great team. So thanks a lot for being with us today. Stay tuned for the next episodes of our UNIO webinars. Let's see what we might add to this ecosystem. Enjoy the rest of the summer. Have a nice evening. Have a nice day wherever you are. See you soon.